Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Ahmad Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Today we're going to study Lecture 5 of Pakistan Affairs series. We're going to study reform movements of Muslim leaders in subcontinent. This is going to be very interesting and from CS's perspective, this is very important topic also. So all the listeners kindly pay attention and let's get started. So here is the list of the contents that we're going to study today. We're going to study Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, Shah Wali Ullah, Syed Ahmed Shaheed Barelvi and Haji Sharitullah. These were the leaders who started reform movements in subcontinent for the revival of Islam, for the protection of Muslims, and we try to learn all these reform movements in much detail today. So we would start the lecture with the reform movement of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi and we would study his background. First of all, Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi was born in 1564 and he died in 1624. His original name was Sheikh Ahmed, but because he was born in Sirhind, he was called Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. His father was Sheikh Abdul Ahad and he belonged to a very religious family, to a family that claimed descent from Hazrat Umar Farooq Razillah anhu. He studied Hadith, Tafsir and philosophy and theology. And because of the reform movement that he started, he was called Mujaddid Alif Sani, which means reformer of the second millennium. So let's study the background of the society during the lifetime of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. What were the things and what Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi experienced that made him start the reform movement? It was the time of Akbar. Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi lived in the era of Akbar. Akbar, the Mughal ruler, the son of Humayun, he was ruling at the time and he started doing some things. He started some reforms that made Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi start his reforms. It was the time of the downfall of religious life of Muslims of India. I would not say at all that it was the time of downfall of Muslim rule in India. No, not at all. India was under the stronghold of Muslims at the time. They were Muslims who were ruling India, the great, the magnificent empire, the Mughal empire. Akbar was the ruler at the time and he was ruling, but it was the time of the downfall of Muslims' religious life. Why? Because Akbar did great damage to Islam and Akbar tried to distort the Islam in subcontinent. People were Muslim in India at the time, but they stopped practicing Islam. There were un-Islamic practices in society. People started believing in karamat. Jurists ceased to refer Quran and Hadith, and a concept of Wahdatul Wujud distorted Islam. Actually, Akbar distorted Islam. So let's study what is this concept of Wahdatul Wujud that people started believing, people started embracing at the time. Wahdatul Wujud is actually a concept that was widespread in India during the lifetime of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. It means that everything is him. What does this mean? It means that the creator and the creature both are similar things. Everything is him. Everything made by God, made by Allah, created by Allah is himself. So there is no difference between the creature and the creation. People started believing in this concept. It distorted Islam and we all Muslims should understand that we differentiate between the creator and creature. We believe that no, not at all, in no way creature and creator can be similar. So this was the concept that was adopted, that was embraced by Muslims of India at the time. It distorted Islam. So these were the things that made Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi start this reform movement for the revival of Islam in India. Now let's study how Akbar distorted Islam. It was the un-Islamic practices and un-Islamic policies of Akbar that damaged Islam, that distorted Islam, and that almost eliminated Islam from subcontinent. So what he did, let's study. Akbar in 1581 introduced Deen-e-Ilahi. What is this Deen-e-Ilahi? Deen-e-Ilahi was actually a new religion invented and introduced by Akbar the Mughal emperor. This is very disheartening to know that a Muslim ruler, invented his own religion when he was Muslim himself. What is this Deen-e-Ilahi? It was actually the amalgamation of all the religions present and practiced in India at the time. Mysticism, philosophy, nature worship, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam, all of these religions were amalgamated into a one single religion. Why Akbar did so? Actually, Akbar had a different policy than his ancestors to rule the great magnificent empire that is Mughal Empire. Akbar was a person who did not want to fight, who did not want to wage war against non-Muslims or those who were a threat to Mughal or Muslim rule, but he wanted to adopt a reconciliatory policy. He wanted to be a good administrator. So, to appease all the non-Muslims of the India, or all the nations, all the religions of India, he tried to amalgamate all religions into one religion. He tried to unite all the people in this way. He wanted to prevent any rebellion, any threats against his empire, against his rule. So he did so. He tried to amalgamate everything so that the people are united and there is no rebellion. This was his strategy to protect his rule, to strengthen his rule in India. But he forgot that he is doing a great damage to his own religion, to his own people, that is Muslims. The introduction of Deen-e-Ilahi posed severe threat to the separate identity of Muslims in India. Deen-e-Ilahi recognized no gods and prophets, and it was the completely different than Islam. I mean, in Islam, we believe in Allah, we believe in prophets, and we believe in the last messenger of Allah, that is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Deen-e-Ilahi neglected all this, and it was introduced by the Akbar the Great, who is called the Great. At the time, to believe in revelation was considered as taqleed. Akbar was actually inspired by a movement that was started around 8th century. It was a movement called Bhakti movement. This movement was a kind of similar that was started by Akbar, Deen-e-Ilahi, and this movement also propounded the unity of people irrespective of their religion, and Akbar was inspired by this movement, so he introduced his own version of Bhakti movement, and he tried to unite people by the help of this new religion. This Deen-e-Ilahi propounded Hindu-Muslim unity. Another strategy he adopted to unite Hindu-Muslim was that he married with Hindu-Muslim. We all know that one of the, I don't know, one or more than one, but he married a woman named Jodha who was not Muslim, and this was his way of uniting the Hindus and the Muslims. So Deen-e-Ilahi was a great damage to Islam in India. Another thing Akbar did to distort Islam was his infallibility decree that he passed in 1579. What does this infallibility decree states, and what is this about? Actually, this decree says that anything the Sultan does is lawful, it is correct. Akbar can never be wrong. It gave Akbar the right to do anything, to pass any law, to do anything in his empire. No Islamic rules or regulations can be implemented on Akbar. He is free to do anything. This was the infallibility decree of Akbar that he passed in 1579. Moreover, Akbar called himself Zill-e-Ilahi, and he made people prostrate in front of himself. We Muslims know that we do not prostrate in front of anybody except Allah. So this was another way to distort Islam and to strengthen his rule and to make people bow down in front of himself. Moreover, he gave Ain-e-Akbari, which means the constitution given by Akbar, and in this constitution he did not refer to Quran or Hadith, but it was a constitution written by himself and his people, and he did not care about the Islamic rules and regulation. He abandoned Islam. So this is how Akbar distorted Islam in India, and all these practices, all these things that Akbar did made Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi start his reform movement. Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi felt the urge to protect Islam and Muslims separate identity in India. So how Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi saved Islam from being eliminated from India? How he protected his people? Let's study his services. Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi's aim was to rid Islam of the accretions of Hindu pantheism. He raised his voice against Akbar. He protected Muslims' separate identity. He refuted Deen-e-Ilahi. He wrote letters to elite and politicians of that time to spread his idea. He condemned the title of Zill-e-Ilahi, and he condemned the treasury of Akbar. He urged people to follow Islam in letter and spirit. He stressed the importance of namaz and roza, and he wrote also to spread his idea. He wrote the pamphlet Ittiba al-Nabuwa, and he gave the concept of Wahdatul Shuhud, which means that everything is from him. This concept was given to counter the concept of Wahdatul Wujud. I'll explain this concept here. Wahdatul Shuhud means that everything is from him. Not everything is him, but everything is from him, from Allah, from the Creator. Everything in this world that we see is from him. And there is a difference, there is a huge difference between the creature and the creator. So we cannot equalize, we cannot imagine creature and creator as the similar things, but everything is from him. Everything in the world is created and made by Allah. So this was the concept given by Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi to refute the concept of Wahdatul Wujud that was adopted, embraced by many Muslims, many people of India at the time. His greatest work on Islamic philosophy was the Tawhid-e-Shuhudi. He explained Sufism and mysticism, and he urged people to not adopt Sufism and mysticism, but to follow Islam in letter and spirit. He urged people to offer namaz and observe roza and the obligations of Islam. So this is how he tried to protect Islam in subcontinent. So what were the results of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi movement? First of all, he was imprisoned by Jahangir. Jahangir was the offspring, the successor of Akbar. He was the son of Akbar who took throne after Akbar. So Jahangir imprisoned Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. Why? Because Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, when he was in camp for the military training, he refused to prostrate in front of Jahangir. Jahangir felt disrespect and he imprisoned Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi for 2 years. Father-in-law of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi was hanged by Jahangir. But then Jahangir realized his mistake and he acquitted Sheikh and freed him. After that, Jahangir made Sheikh his advisor. He was not like his father, so he discontinued all the un-Islamic practices and policies initiated by his father Akbar. Jahangir eliminated Deen-e-Ilahi. Jahangir made Sheikh his advisor, and he adopted all the Islamic practices and Islamic law in his rule. So this is how Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi saved Muslims of subcontinent. A very important result of his movement was that he sowed the seeds of two-nation theory. He made Muslims realize that they are a separate nation from Hindus. Hindus and Muslims can never be united. Hindus and Muslims can never be amalgamated. They are two separate nations. So he sowed the seeds of two-nation theory that was the foundation of the formation of Pakistan. Iqbal called him spiritual guardian of Muslims. He was also called Imam-e Rabbani. So this was the reform movement of Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. He saved Muslims during the rule of Akbar. He saved Islam from being completely eliminated from subcontinent. This was the Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi reform movement in subcontinent. So now we would start the reform movement of Shah Wali Ullah. But before starting this movement, I'd like to mention one thing here that I forgot to mention at the outset, that students, whatever I explain here today in this particular lecture, this is from the book Pakistan and World Affairs by Shamshad Ahmed. This particular topic, that is the revival of Islam in India and all the reform movements, this is from the book Pakistan and the World Affairs by Shamshad Ahmed. So the source of this lecture is this book. So there is no need for any of you to worry about, to be suspicious about the authenticity of this material. This material that I'm explaining here today is authentic. This is from that book. If any of you wants to read that book, read this particular topic from that book, can definitely go there and read. But there is no need for any of you, because I have read that book, I have read this particular topic from that book, and everything that I'm explaining here today is from that book. So have faith in me, believe me, and just study whatever I'm explaining here today, because this is enough for CSS aspirants, and there is no need for any of you to waste the time in reading books and wandering here and there. Just study whatever I'm explaining here. Alright, so let's continue with the reform movement of Shah Waliullah. First we would study the background or introduction of Shah Waliullah. Shah Waliullah was born in India. His real name was Qutbuddin. He's also called Imam-e-Hind. At the age of 7, he completed Quran, and after finishing his education, he went to Hijaz for pilgrimage and higher studies. He returned in July 1732. Then he started teaching in Madrasa Rahimiyya, which was the madrasa of his father. His father's name was Shah Abdul Rahim. So this was the brief introduction of Shah Waliullah. Now we would study the background of the society during the lifetime of Shah Waliullah. Shah Waliullah actually faced a very chaotic time during his lifetime. It was the end of Alamgir's rule, and social, political, economic as well as religious condition of Muslims was very poor. Muslim rulers were in dissipation. They were busy in luxuries and did not protect their people. Muslims themselves steered away from Quran and Hadith. They stopped practicing Islam. They stopped referring to Quran. They abandoned Islam. This is the reason that non-Muslims and the rival groups of Muslims started raising their heads. Two rebellious groups, that is Marathas and Jats, started weakening Mughal rule and Muslim rule in India. Non-Muslims were also invading and killing Muslims. Muslims were oppressed during the lifetime of Shah Waliullah. This was something that Shah Waliullah faced. But the reason behind this downfall of Muslims was just one, that Muslims steered away from Quran and Hadith, the locals and the rulers also. There was sectarian conflict between Shia, Sunni, Hanafiya, Sufi and Mullah, and there was a moral downfall also. So this was the background of the society during the lifetime of Shah Waliullah. Now we would study the services of Shah Waliullah, what he did to protect Muslims, how he started his reform movements, and what were his efforts to save Islam and Muslims in India. First of all, he identified the causes of decline of Muslims in India. He believed that Muslims are facing various problems because they have abandoned Islamic way of life. The rulers of Muslims had abandoned Islamic way of life. They had stopped referring to Quran and Hadith, and they had stopped pursuing Islamic way of life. They had stopped Islamic practices. So this was the reason, the cause identified by Shah Wali Ullah. Then Shah decided to launch a campaign to popularize Islamic values amongst Muslims and to present Islam in a rational manner. We have already studied that there were sectarian conflicts also during the lifetime of Shah Waliullah. So Shah decided to present the rational image of Islam. Shah started studying the writings of each school of thought, and he wrote a very comprehensive volumes about what is fair and just in the light of Quran. Then Shah translated Quran in Persian language. These all were the strategies, these all were the ways to unite Muslims at the time, because Muslims were divided. There were sectarian conflicts in India at the time. So he tried to unite all the sects in India. He translated Quran in Persian language so people could read the Quran in their own language and could understand. Instead of blind imitation, he focused on ijtihad and he gave the concept of rationality. He wanted to present the rational and the real image of Islam. He urged to end the social evils like dowry. He came to forefront at the time and wrote letters to Mughals to give up their corrupt practices, to soldiers to inculcate within the spirit of Jihad, to workers to remind them that the economic prosperity of the state depends on its people, to emperor to keep a check on all those who pose threats to the empire. These were some of the services of Shah Waliullah to protect Muslims. Moreover, Shah Waliullah established several branches of his school at Delhi. He trained students in different branches of Islamic knowledge and entrusted them with the teaching of his students. He wrote Hajjatul Balagha, in which he explained the causes of chaos and downfall of Muslims. The causes are enlisted here. He said that the pressure on public treasury and luxuries of the Sultan are the cause of the downfall of Muslim rule in India. He said that heavy taxation on common man and tax evasion is also the cause of chaos and downfall of Muslims. Moreover, he was the first reformist to realize the importance of economics in a social and political setup. He emphasized on economics very much. He was the first person, he was the first Muslim leader to emphasize on economics. He visualized a social order based on economic equality, brotherhood and fraternity. He criticized the accumulation of wealth, and he said that it is the accumulation of wealth, it is the economic inequality that is the root of all the evils of a society. This was a very unique and a very interesting and important idea given by Shah Waliullah. He provoked the spirit of jihad in Muslims to protect themselves and their homeland. He appealed Ahmad Shah Abdali to protect Muslims from Maratha and Najibud-Dawla, another name that I could not mention here. He requested these two Muslim leaders to protect Muslims from Maratha. He laid the foundation of Islamic Renaissance and he became an inspiration for many Muslims that came after him. So these were the services of Shah Waliullah. These were his efforts and the things that he did to protect Islam, to revive Islam in India and to protect Muslims in India. Now we would study the result of Shah Waliullah's movement. It was the result of Shah Waliullah's movement that brave and great leaders like Najibud-Dawla and Ahmad Shah Abdali came forward to protect Muslims. They came forward to crush Marathas, the threat to Mughal Empire at the time. They came forward to crush the dream of Maratha to rule the subcontinent. They saved Muslims. The battles fought for the revival of Islam are enlisted here, and these were also the result of Shah Waliullah's movement that inculcated the spirit of Jihad in Muslims. Battle of Plassey was fought in 1757. Third Battle of Panipat was fought between Maratha and Ahmad Shah Durrani in 1761, and Ahmad Shah Durrani crushed the power of Marathas in India. Battle of Buxar was fought in Bengal in 1764, and Anglo-Mysore wars were fought in 1767 to 1799. 4 Anglo-Mysore wars were fought between the British and the Tiger of Mysore, who is a very famous Muslim leader named Tipu Sultan. So these battles were the result of the Shah Waliullah's movement. Shah Waliullah instilled the spirit of jihad in these leaders, in these brave Muslim leaders. So Marathas were crushed and Mughal rule was saved. I have explained it earlier. Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi, whose reform movement we would study in future, got inspired and started his jihad movement, and it sowed the seeds of Muslim nationalism. So Shah Waliullah's reform movement was the Islamic Renaissance, and it inspired many Muslim leaders that came after Shah Waliullah. So this was the result and the impact of Shah Waliullah's movement. Now we would study the most unique, different and interesting reform movement of subcontinent, that is reform movement of Syed Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi. We would start with the background of Syed Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi. He was born in 1786 and died in 1831. Syed Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi was the student of Shah Abdul Aziz, who is the son of Shah Waliullah. So from the very beginning, from very early age, he was inspired from Shah Waliullah. Unlike the people he followed, for example Shah Waliullah and Shah Abdul Aziz, Syed Ahmad Shaheed was a man of action. He was not just a scholar. He believed in implementing the teachings of the people he followed. So he started a jihad movement. This is a very unique thing about his reform movement. In 1812, he joined forces of Nawab Amir Khan of Tong, a Pathan military leader, to take part in jihad against British. Syed Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi believed in taking practical steps and not just writing. Unlike the people he followed, unlike his ancestors, that is Shah Waliullah and Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi. We have studied that Shah Wali Ullah and Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi did all the literary work. They wrote to inculcate, to instill a spirit of jihad in Muslims. Shah Waliullah wrote Ittiba al-Nabuwa, Hajjatul Baligha. He translated Quran in Persian language, but he did not take any practical steps. He did not start any armed struggle against the oppressors. Syed Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi was the leader who implemented on all the teachings of the scholars of the past. He was called Amirul Mominin by his followers. In 1821, he went to Mecca and came back in 1823. He propounded armed resistance. I've explained it very much. And he started Jihad movement, which was called Mujahideen movement. So let's study what was his movement. Before studying the reform movement started by Syed Ahmed Shaheed Barelvi, we would start the background of the society during the lifetime of Syed Ahmed Shaheed. Unfortunately, Syed Ahmed Shaheed lived in the time of persecution of Muslims. Muslims were facing downfall at the hands of British, Sikh, and Hindus. They did not have the courage to retaliate. They were oppressed by British, Sikh, and Hindus in different parts of India. British conquered Bengal, and Sikh took Punjab and north of subcontinent. Mughals were left with very little power. Maharaja Ranjit Singh established Sikh Empire in Punjab in 1799, and cruel Raja Budh Singh was in power in KPK in northern part of subcontinent. And in KPK, Muslims faced the worst time of their life. So this was the background of the society. This was the situation that urged Syed Ahmed Shaheed Bareilly to start his reform movement. So let's study the services of Syed Ahmed Shaheed Bareilly. What were the efforts of Syed Ahmed? What he did for the revival of Islam, for the revival of Muslim rule in India. Syed Ahmed actually vowed to pursue the legacy of Shah Wali Ullah, that is Jihad. He was inspired by the former reformists and took practical steps to implement the teachings of them. He started preparing for a holy war. He started jihadi movement from northwestern subcontinent that is today called Chasadda. He believed that the revival of Islam in India was only possible through armed struggle. He fought against British and Sikh and wanted to make sure that Muslims are free from their oppression. He wanted Muslims to be ruled by fellow Muslims. He struggled to unite Muslims against Sikh and Hindus, and on returning from Hijaz, he launched his movement. In the previous slide, I discussed that in 1821, he went to Hijaz and he stayed there for 2 years, and in 1823 he came back from Hijaz and then he launched his movement. He traveled across almost entire India and gathered his forces. He started jihad from northwest of India where Muslims were persecuted by Sikh, and he defeated the Sikhs in Akora and then in Hazra. He was made the ruler of localities of northwestern subcontinent, and he implemented Sharia law in northwestern subcontinent. Then he started doing reforms in that area. Soon his army numbered over 80,000 people. Now here I'd like to explain something. I'd like to refute a misconception, a general opinion that is taken negatively, a negative belief about jihad. In this lecture, in this particular slide, I've talked about jihad many times. That Syed Ahmed Shaheed Bareilly started a jihadi movement, and generally people take this term, people take this practice negatively, and they believe that this is something savage, this is something wrong, immoral. So I'd like to explain a little bit about here. Look, Muslims at the time in India were oppressed. They were persecuted by people, by who? The people who were invaders, British. It was the land of Muslims, it was the land of Mughals. But British invaded and started persecuting Muslims. They started taking the hold of the land of Muslims. So this is the reason that Syed Ahmed Shaheed Bareilly started this armed resistance, this armed struggle. He named this as armed struggle Jihad, which was fair, which was justified, because he started this to take the rule back from British, to defend Muslims, to protect Muslims from the persecution, from the oppression that was started by the British. So this jihad was justified. It was not immoral. It was not savage. Muslims started this. Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi started this to protect Muslims and to protect Muslim rule. This was justified. He started struggling for the unification of Muslims. He started uniting Muslims. He started strengthening Muslims so that they could protect Muslims and they could eliminate British from their land. So we should not take this negatively, and we should understand the root, the soul of this jihad, and we should understand what was happening at the time to Muslims of India and why Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi started this armed resistance and this armed struggle. He just wanted the rule back from Britishers. He just wanted the protection of Muslims. He just wanted Muslims to be ruled by fellow Muslims and not some invaders. So this was the soul, this was the main aim of the armed struggle, of the jihadi movement of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi. I hope this is clear now. Now we would study the ignominious, saddening and unfortunate end of jihad movement. The movement was initially very successful, but soon conspiracies began against Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi. What happened at the time? Actually, the army of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi consisted of people from different communities with different approaches. They had different opinion on how to pursue the campaign, how to implement Islamic law and Sharia in different areas. In north, that is Peshawar, KPK, the area that is today known as KPK in Pakistan. So the people were from different communities. They were from different backgrounds. They were Muslims, but they were from different communities and they had different foundations and different concepts of Islamic Sharia. So they had different opinion on how to pursue the campaign and how to implement the Sharia law in different areas that they were conquering, that the army of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi was conquering at the time. So a rift erupted between the chieftains of his army. Sikh took advantage and bereaved the army of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi. Two people, Sardar Yar Muhammad and his brother Sultan Muhammad Khan, were bribed by the Sikh. These people waged war against Sayyid Ahmad, unfortunately, and very saddening. Sayyid Ahmad, disheartened by the disloyalty of Muslims of his own brothers, moved his army from Peshawar to Balakot. There again he was betrayed by his people, and his people told the Sikhs of a way to attack Sayyid Ahmad. Then Sayyid Ahmad was killed in Balakot war in 1831 by Sikh army. This was the saddening and ignominious end of jihad movement. Jihad movement came to a bad end. That was started by Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi with an aim of uniting Muslims and overthrowing the British power and protecting Muslims and reviving the rule of Muslims in India once again. But the movement came to a sad end. But there were definitely some good impacts of the movement, and we would study these. Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi's jihad movement was the first armed struggle against the British and non-Muslims. Before Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed Bareilvi, the Muslim leaders were only doing the literary work and they did not start any practical steps against the Britishers. It was a movement to achieve religious and spiritual freedom. It aimed at uniting Muslims against the oppressors, and it was the forerunner of Pakistan movement. This was something that is believed by many scholars, that Syed Ahmed Shaheed Bareilvi's Jihad movement or Mujahideen movement was the forerunner of Pakistan movement. Now we would study another reform movement that is named Faraizi movement, that was started by Haji Sharitullah in 1830 and the movement ended in 1857. Studying the background of Haji Sharitullah. Haji Sharitullah was born in Faridpur, district of Bengal. He was born in 1781 and died in 1840. Haji Sharitullah spent 20 years of his life in Mecca. Let us study the background of the society. What were the things, what were the problems of the society at the time that made Haji Sharitullah start this Faraizi movement? Actually, Haji Sharitullah was from Bengal and the condition of Bengali Muslims was miserable at the time. They were a victim of mistrust from British. We all know that for more than 350 years, Mughals ruled in India. So when Britishers replaced Mughals and Muslims, they mistrusted Muslims. They did not trust Muslims. They believed that Muslims would initiate a revolt against Britishers. So they oppressed Muslims. Muslims were a victim of mistrust from British. Muslims were economically and educationally crippled by British because British wanted to prevent any rebellion from Muslims. Moreover, they were oppressed by Hindu zamindars also. In Bengal, Muslims were in very bad condition, in abysmal condition. They were the lower class of the society and they used to work at the lands, at the farms of Hindus, and Hindus also used to suppress these Muslims. So this was the background of the society. This was the condition of the society at the time that made Haji Sharitullah start his movement that was named Faraizi movement. So what is this Faraizi movement and what were the efforts of Haji Sharitullah for the revival of Islam in India? Haji Sharitullah, I have discussed in the previous slide, has spent 20 years in Makkah, and on return from Makkah, he started his reform movement. He observed the condition, the oppression of Muslims in Bengal, and he started his reform movement. He addressed the most oppressed class of the Muslims and he urged Muslims to give up all the un-Islamic practices. He believed that all the atrocities on Muslims and all the oppression of Muslims is because the Muslims have stopped practicing Islam. So he urged Muslims to give up all un-Islamic practices and he emphasized on fulfilling all the religious obligations and duties of a Muslim. He emphasized on obligations, which is why his reform movement is called Faraizi movement. He emphasized on the farais of a Muslim. His followers were called Faraizis and he opposed superstitious beliefs. He forbade Tazia on Muharram and he forbade singing and dancing on wedding. He declared the country Darul Harb. This was the time when he declared the country Darul Harb, and he believes that it is not possible in the country to follow Islamic practices, and because it was difficult for Muslims under the rule of British to follow Islamic rules, so he declared the country Darul Harb. This was some of his efforts to bring Muslims back to Islam, and he started this movement. He urged Muslims to follow all the Islamic rules and the fulfilling of all the religious obligations. So this was some of the efforts of Haji Sharitullah, and this was the brief account of Faraizi movement. So this was all about the reform movements of Muslim leaders in India, and the Faraizi movement is actually not discussed much in the book that I am referring today. This is not very important with the respect of CSS exams also, but I wanted to share all the knowledge that I had. I wanted to discuss it here, and I wanted to pass on all the knowledge that I had, and all the movements that I studied in the book Pakistan and World Affairs by Shamshad Ahmed. And Alhamdulillah, I've explained everything here that I read in that book. I tried my best to explain in the most simple manner, and I hope that all the listeners get the point and understand whatever I explain here. So this is the end of this lecture, and today we have studied the reform movements in much detail. I have told you guys earlier that the source of this lecture is the book Pakistan and World Affairs by Shamshad Ahmed. Whatever I explained here today is from that book, and this is the end of this lecture. In the next lecture, we would study the educational movements by the Muslim leaders in subcontinent for the revival of the oppressed Muslims in subcontinent. So till then, Allah Hafiz, and study hard, work hard, and best of luck for your examination. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.